You know, I started last week's podcast episode with a little bit of a mini crash out, because of the realization that this intro that I've been promising you guys is probably not coming anytime soon. And I've been struggling with the fact that this podcast has remained so bare bones, now entering 15 episodes. And that's really been very frustrating. And now I know exactly one of the things that led to me having such frustrations and deciding to have that little crash out in the last episode. I mean, granted, it's nothing big. It's not like I went viral for saying stupid crap. I just just started last week's podcast by complaining, which is not really what people tune in for. And quite frankly, it's amazing to me that anybody happens to tune in to listen to my thoughts on the last week in film news. But, you know, I do feel like I need to comment on this because it may help a new dad out there. I learned over the past few weeks that men can get postpartum depression. And it seems that I have it. Postpartum depression affects roughly 15 to 20% of women. For obvious reasons, it is much more common in women than men. Um, but, only around 8 to 10% of men are affected by it. And apparently, I can consider myself lucky because I'm apparently one of those 8 to 10% from what I've learned. Uh, you know, jokes aside, it does explain a lot. I've If you haven't noticed from the how I started last week's episode, I've been dealing with massive levels of stress. I've been trying to hold a lot of things together at home. And adjusting to new things in life, adjusting to the new baby, and meanwhile, I have to play this game of catch up as a film critic. On top of this podcast and the weekly digest and all that stuff. Um, I mean, I've just you know I've been dealing with what it's been like to be a new dad with with what's now 5 month old, close to coming on 6 month old, and it is not easy with a newborn. I'm sure there are a lot of other things that are gonna be stressing me out about having a child in the future, but, you know, I saw someone say, on a podcast clip that came out, and I don't know exactly the name of the woman that I happened to see that in this podcast clip, but she made a comment about, you know, being a parent is so great, but you have to sit through about the first 5 years of losing sleep and all that stuff. And I'm definitely feeling it 5 months in. Forget 5 years. I'm feeling it 5 months in. And on top of that, I have to take care of pets that I don't want because sorry to any pet lovers out there. I used to be a pet lover and then I had a baby and all of a sudden that mattered to me more and that was the top priority. And with the situation that's going on at home financially, and other things, I don't think it's a smart thing to have these pets around and waking up to the cats whining at me, constantly having to take my dog out at least 3 times a day and feeding them and picking up after his crap and all that stuff, and having to clean up litter boxes and all that stuff. It has not been fun because all I can think to myself is, "This is all unneeded stress that I don't need," because on top of that, I have to help the baby mama with the baby. And then you add that stress to the fact that my house is an absolute another mess. And I'm not talking about like, oh, the baby it has a bunch of stuff around and all this stuff that around the baby is always going to be a mess. I'm not talking about that because that comes with the territory. I'm talking about the house is a mess. I honestly think it would be smarter to cut our losses and sell this house and downsize somewhere, but unfortunately, that is not an option at the moment. And on top of all that, I am the only one working full time. Oh, and by the way, I have to do this film criticism thing where I have to constantly keep up with new movies. I have to write reviews for them. And I decided to take a gamble on doing a podcast and weekly digest to react weekly to major news events. And by the way, as always, I'm following the Oscar race. So it has not been easy. It's been very stressful and learning that I have that apparently I have postpartum depression is not something that has added to making my stress feel any better. Like, to be completely honest with you, writing up the weekly digest, which I obviously use as show notes for this podcast, and then doing this podcast has been the most painful thing to do every week because on paper, it should be actually not that hard. After work, sit down, see if there's anything that major that happened for film news, write it down, get to it by the time it's time for a new weekly digest, and then record the podcast. And in a perfect world, I'd be recording the podcast, so like say on Sunday evening or something like that. But because there's so much to do at home and every so much is on the weight of it feels like almost like the weight of the world on my shoulder. I've been basically getting this stuff out done super, super last second on Monday evenings to the point that that's why I no longer am trying to get the weekly digest out by Monday morning and just releasing it on Tuesday morning with the podcast with little fanfare on social media because it's just I just can't get to it on time like I want to get to it on time. It is a miracle that I get any content out to you guys. You have no idea how much of a miracle it is. My letterbox where I've been really wanting to correctly organize that and log so much of that and so I can be able to do more best of lists and go through the history of cinema. I have not been able to even get through a revamp of 2020 to looking at the last couple of years because of what's going on at home. Now, thankfully, anger towards the baby, which is one of the symptoms that can happen among men dealing with postpartum depression, that is definitely not an issue that I have with my postpartum. Um, Thankfully, if anything, every time I see the baby, even with you know any frustrations that come with an inconvenience is I get a big smile on my face. But I definitely have been feeling much more irritable. Um, and again, I've been mostly taking those frustrations out of the pets. I'm not like kicking them or anything like that, but I've been very annoyed and angry with them. And I think my dog can sense that I'm not to hang around me. Um, it is tough dealing with something this uncommon among us guys. And again, juggling work, family life, film criticism, constantly chasing the next movie, the next discussion, having to keep up certain numbers if I want to stay as a member of certain critics groups. So because of all that, I kind of can't afford to take a break. So my only option for now is to power through and make use of whatever help I've been offered. But I probably will be taking a break come Labor Day weekend, but until then, I have to power through. Um, so I just wanted to share my experience about that before we get started. Sorry to start things on a bit of a downer, but because I gotta believe there are other men out there going through the same thing. If you're part of that 8 to 10% like me, don't feel any stigma about admitting it. You're not the only one dealing with it. There's no shame in asking for or getting help for it. It is dudes can get postpartum depression as well. And I will say that at the very least, for all of the stress that it gives me, film, even in a day to like today where I binged a bunch of these crappy low budget horror films that I was curious about catching up on from earlier in the year, it at least gives me a little bit of an escape. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Consider that the non-film discussion of the week, just to get things started. In in me making sure that other people out there don't feel alone and they gotta hear this. Okay, enough depressing crap. Let's get started. Let's actually talk some movie stuff. This is your episode of the Mendez Movie Report Podcast, the 15th episode for the week of August 4th, 2026. I'm your host and namesake film critic Louis A. Mendez, and on this episode, I will be talking about Spider-Man Brand New Day, which has dropped a historic nuclear bomb at the box office, plus some commentary on more Children of Blood and Bone drama, a stunning Golden Globes related lawsuit, serious allegations against Jared Leto, Mike Leigh's retirement plans, Glen Hansard's tragic passing, and as always, looking at the latest box office news, along with what's coming up the next for theaters and streaming. And of course, the undisputed biggest news item in film, period, over this past week has been the absolute nuclear bomb at the box office that has been Spider-Man Brand New Day. Just when you thought the Odyssey was hoarding all of the attention and all the conversation, 2 weeks later, Spider-Man Brand New Day basically said, okay, hold my beer. Um, before we talk about the box office news regarding Spider-Man Brand New Day, let me go ahead and get my review out to you. For those of you who have not read it, though, you can read the review over at my Substack, MendezMovieReport.com, anytime you want. And because I did have some thoughts about this movie where I'm not as high on it as others are, but I do still think this is a solid movie to recommend to people. Um, there was a time when the Marvel Cinematic Universe was the untouchable juggernaut of a franchise, one that other studios didn't even bother trying to counter program. Even some hardcore cinephiles counted its event films among their most anticipated releases of the year. Those days are now largely gone. We now live in a world where Doom Part 3 didn't blink at Avengers Doomsday, and those same cinephiles are now cracking jokes about the MCU when gimmicks like Infinity Vision pop up on screen. However, one brand the MCU can still rely on is arguably the most popular superhero period at the box office, and that's Spider-Man. And I'd argue the web slinger is right up there with the Cape Crusader when it comes to superheroes who can sell a movie on their own. No grand cinematic universe required to get people to show up. And this iteration of Spidey, played by Tom Holland, has been embraced by audiences to the point that he's become an automatic box office magnet. This version of Spidey. It certainly doesn't hurt that Holland is also showing up in another major event film alongside wife Zendaya and John Bernthal just 2 weeks after they were all part of the Odyssey ensemble. On my end, Holland Spider-Man films have been enjoyable, though I can't say I've been as in love with all of them as other audiences have. His first appearance in Captain America: Civil War was delightful. Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home were enjoyable enough, and Spider-Man No Way Home is second only to the 2002 Spider-Man as my personal favorite live-action Spidey film. Definitely one of my favorite films of 2021. While my feelings on this continuity of Spider-Man movies have varied, I've always praised Tom Holland as the best Peter Parker I've seen on screen. I'd rank him above Maguire, Garfield, and anyone else who has thrown on the suit. And in this latest outing, Spider-Man Brand New Day, Holland delivers his best performance as the web slinger yet. You can tell that after playing the character across 4 solo films and 3 ensemble superhero movies, he has only gotten better at understanding who Peter Parker is and what Spider Man is supposed to represent. This time around, Spider Man has other Marvel heroes joining him. The previously mentioned John Bertha reprises his television role as Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, while Mark Ruffalo returns as Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk. There's also another superhero appearance, technically two, but marketing has kept those two a secret. And I respect listeners who haven't caught up with the film yet by not spoiling the surprise. Though apparently John Lacey on the red carpet decided to just blurt out who you know, a certain superhero character. Both Bernthal and Ruffalo nailed their performances, though the latter doesn't have nearly as much screen time as I expected. Bernthal, meanwhile, is introduced into his first MCU film appearance in a rather clunky and jarring fashion, but the screenplay makes up for it thanks to how good Frank and Peter's banter and back and forths are. The first act is the most jarring part of the movie for me, particularly the opening 10 minutes. We get a barrage of quick cuts and edits, catching us up on Spidey's antics in No Way Home, including a rather offhand mention of Daredevil's villainous organization, The Hand. And, I've talked about this before that as someone who I just don't have any time to watch any of the MCU TV shows. I've never watched any of them aside from clips that pop up online. I always get a little annoyed when major TV elements get folded into the films. Fortunately, I did watch those old Netflix series back in the day, so I already knew what I needed to know about Frank Castle and the Ham. But it's definitely a jarring thing in the first act that almost made me wonder: did I miss anything? Since when were Frank and Spider-Man acquainted and all this? So there's definitely a lot of like filling in the blank that even people who have watched all the MCU TV shows are gonna have to do. Once that rough opening stretch passes, though, Brand New Day settles into something far more grounded and emotionally mature, the kind of film we really haven't seen from the MCU in quite some time. It balances the action, drama, and audience pleasing MCU comedy surprisingly well. At points, I almost felt like I was seeing flashes of those pre Infinity War standalone MCU movies. Now, that said, the film is still juggling a lot. Spider Man has to navigate relationships with superheroes he knows, figure out how to approach his best friend and ex girlfriend after they've forgotten he exists, deal with his evolving powers, causing him to lose control of them, and unravel the main mystery involving a hidden villain whose role has been largely concealed in the marketing. For me, all of that occasionally made the movie feel more bloated, and I definitely felt the weight of a 2 hour and 15-minute plus runtime. But ultimately, I did walk out of my screening having enjoyed the experience quite a bit. But given all of the hyperbole I've seen from critics who got to see it early, once again, Disney didn't bother giving us Tampa Bay critics a major screening. I was left a little underwhelmed because the movie never quite reached that upper tier for me. While I appreciate the more grounded, emotionally mature storytelling, it also translated into a film that occasionally felt like filler or forced setup for future MC projects, particularly in the third act. Like I said earlier, this absolutely hits the spot as a popcorn action flick, and audiences will have plenty of laughs and crowd pleasing moments to react to. But the story never achieves the level of distinction that I associate with the MCU's very best films. If you're looking for grounded and mature Peter Parker, story, you'll probably enjoy this a little more than I did. However, if you come away feeling like you just watched a bridge between bigger events or a stealth setup for another team of heroes, you might find yourself where I was as well. I look, I really like Spider-Man Brand New Day as a movie on its own terms. But when viewed as part of the MCU's larger vision, its noticeable flaws keep it from living up to the immense hype that has surrounded it. I mean, I will tell you, I have seen some people, and some of these are critics that I legitimately enjoy following, who they they are not just saying this is their favorite Tom Holland Spider-Man film. They're not even. I've even seen some say that it's not that they think this is their favorite Spider-Man film. Period. And I've even say that this is their favorite MCU movie ever. And look, everything is relative, everything's subjective. People can get on my ass about certain takes that I've had, certain movies that I've, you know, have ranked really high at the end of the year that others might think it shouldn't be there. But I will tell you that I kind of feel baffled by talk that this is that much of a masterpiece because I don't think it is. I think this is a solid, good, easy to recommend solo Spider-Man film, but I do think that it has its issues that I can't ignore either. I can't put this up there among the top tier of MCU movies for me. So what are the pros? The most grounded an MCU sequel has been in quite some time. Most emotionally mature these Spider-Man films have been potentially Tom Holland's best performance yet as Peter Parker. Great mixture of action, drama, and comedic audience moments. Plays well enough as its own separate film. Cons bloated with various subplots, which lead to the movie overstaying to welcome, at least with me. First act is the roughest part with some jarring fast tracking of inclusions from other Marvel properties or things that we didn't get to see on screen necessarily or in a fuller context. So overall, my final grade for Spider-Man Brand New Day, which I'm probably something like a negative Nancy on it compared to other people, but it is a solid B plus. I do recommend you go see this in theaters if you're the one of the only people on earth that apparently didn't go see this in theaters. I do think this is worth seeing in theaters. It just won't end up being one of my favorite movies of the year like it will be for other people. And that leads us to the past weekend in new movies overall. Again, the biggest film of the past weekend was undoubtedly Spider Man Brand New Day, which dropped an absolute nuke at the box office by delivering the biggest opening weekend in history, grossing nearly $1 billion worldwide in just a few days. It surpassed the previous record set by Avengers Endgame alongside The Odyssey, which posted an impressive sub 50% hold, by the way. The two films teamed up to deliver the biggest box office weekend of all time. And take that, Netflix's Ted Sarandos, whose comments about movie theaters being outdated literally came this very week last year. Talk about a cold take that has not aged well. Brand New Day was a hit with both critics and especially audiences. Among critics, it earned 90% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 66 on Metacritic. Among audiences, it posted a whopping 98% of the popcorn meter, a 4.1 on Letterboxd, an 8.2 on IMDb, and an A cinema score. With word of mouth like that, the film should have plenty of legs as it chases the $2 billion dollar mark. Now, um, you of course just heard my B plus review for it. Um, the biggest piece of counter programming this past weekend was Black Bear's I Want Your Sex, the sex comedy thriller directed by indie queer icon Greg Araki and starring Olivia Wilde and Cooper Hoffman. The film was met with strong critical reviews but lukewarm audience reactions. It earned an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 68 on Metacritic. Among audiences, though, it posted a mediocre 61% on the popcorn meter, a decent 3.4 on Letterboxd, and a middling 6.3 on IMDb. And I found this to be an okay enough little comedy, though I'm nowhere near as high on it as other critics I've seen are. Um, I lean closer to where audiences landed. This is more of a B minus for me. Though we'll see how maybe it ages with me by the end of the year. Some of that is just a little bit of my personal sensibilities with dealing with this subject. Though I did appreciate how sex positive the movie was trying to be. Um, Meanwhile, prolific Japanese director Kiyoshi Kurosawa, who is typically associated with horror films, I mean, his most infamous film of all time is Cure, considered by many to be potentially one of the greatest horror films ever made. But he has a new movie beginning a slow rollout that happened this past weekend through Janus Films, titled "The Samurai and the Prisoner." It's a departure for him, exploring a samurai story that blends thriller and mystery elements. Janus was kind enough to provide me with a screener link, and with the film expanding wider next weekend, I did write up a review that will be available on my Substack first thing tomorrow morning, after this recording is out on Tuesday. Tomorrow morning on Wednesday, I will have a review out on the Substack. And spoiler, I really liked it. Critics have been significantly higher on this one than audiences so far, though. Among critics, it holds a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes and an 81 on Metacritic. Among audiences, however, it has just a 3.4 on Letterboxd and a 6.8 on IMDb. The Megan spinoff that Blumhouse almost wiped from memory after Megan 2.0 flopped at the box office and killed their plans to transform the series from a horror franchise into something more darkly comedic. Soulmate finally arrived on digital after Blumhouse opted to dump it when they apparently couldn't find a buyer. The movie was met with negative audience reviews, while critics were so unprepared for the sudden release that there still isn't a meaningful sample size from major review aggregators. It currently sits at 2.7 on Letterboxd and a 5.8 on IMDb. I did watch this right before doing this podcast and writing the weekly digest. And while I didn't find it nearly as atrocious as I've seen others do, I did not like this movie. It definitely felt like a super cheap horror movie that was trying to create, I guess, like a future villain for Megan to battle. I can definitely see why this tested bad and why Blumhouse gave up on it, to the point that they tried to sell it and then they gave up and just decided to dump it on digital with barely any fanfare whatsoever. In fact, I knew some people who didn't even know that this movie was coming out in the first place until it came out on Saturday. And that's another weird thing. They didn't drop it on Thursday or Friday. They dropped it on Saturday of all days. And finally, Amazon straight to stream release of Devil's Mouth was met with terrible reactions from both critics and audiences. Among critics, it earned an 8 at 35% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 46 on Metacritic. Among audiences, it has a pathetic 17% of the popcorn meter, a horrendous 1.9 on Letterboxd, and a pathetic 4.7 on IMDb. I wouldn't call it atrocious in the way some of these scores suggest, but I did find it equal parts boring and frustrating, largely because of how stupidly the characters are written in that movie. So I would not recommend bothering with The Devil's Mouth unless you're some massive creature feature fan. And I'm a massive creature feature fan, and I did not like that movie. So I recommend definitely Spider-Man Brand New Day. Um, Check to see if maybe I Want Your Sex Would Be Your Speed or not. But quite frankly, you could skip Soulmate and The Devil's Mouth, honestly. As for The Samurai and the Prisoner, which might be not in your market yet, but will be in the upcoming weeks, again, I will have a review out, MendezMovieReport.com, first thing Wednesday morning. All right, now what about the next weekend in new movies? Well, next weekend we'll see a slew of new films released as studios try to play catch up after weeks of trying to avoid the juggernauts that have been The Odyssey and Spider-Man Brand New Day. The biggest release of the weekend will be One Night Only, a bizarre rom-com starring Caleb Turner and Monica Barber, setting the world where single people are only allowed to have sex once per year. You did not hear me wrong. That's literally what the movie is about. I was actually invited to a press screening for this. And once again, shout out to Universal for Never forgetting we Tampa critics exist, unlike other big studios. But I had to skip it for home life reasons. As a result, I will be catching this one on Thursday afternoon with a written review coming first thing Friday morning. Searchlight Pictures, meanwhile, will be releasing Super Troopers 3, the follow up to the 2001 cult comedy classic, and its less popular 2018 sequel. This feels a bit like when we got that third My Big Fat Greek Wedding movie after the sequel that for that one saw a noticeable drop off in reception, but we'll see. I'm expecting something roughly on par with the previous film. I'm not aware of any screenings for this one outside a major city, so I'll be catching it as soon as I get a chance at my local theater, or if I end up having to wait for home media. A24 will begin a slow rollout of Tony, starring Dominic Sessa and Tony Banderas, Emilia Jones, Leo Woodall, and Stavros Halkias. The film examines a period in the younger life of famed cook and writer Anthony Bourdain and happens to be directed by Matt Johnson, who, among other things, helmed 2023's great biopic Blackberry, a really good movie. Didn't quite make it into my best of the year list, but came close. The film has already been seen by plenty of critics and has been met with strong reviews, but as always, A24 didn't bother with us Tampa critics, so I'll be catching this whenever it finally reaches my market. This remains a long shot awards contender, so it will be worth keeping an eye on how it performs at the box office. The third film from director James Schoenborn, Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma, which premiered at Cannes to good reviews and has posted solid early audience scores, will begin its rollout from Neon next weekend. I know a lot of people are excited for this one. Showburn's films have found a huge following among higher brow critics and the queer community. I've said this before. I'm personally 0-2 with their work. Sorry for anyone that hates hearing that. I really hope this is the one though that finally clicks with me. Though, based from what I've seen from the marketing, I'm not that optimistic, but we'll see. I'll give it a fair shot. Still, Neon isn't screening this anywhere near my areas, so I'll catch it whenever I get the chance to in my local market. As for another smaller indie release, Late Fame, starring William Dafoe and Greta Lee, will begin its own slow rollout. The drama follows an aging poet played by Dafoe who finds a new audience among a group of actors, including Lee's character, for whom he appears to be developing feelings. The film premiered at Venice last year to decent reviews, and I'll make sure to check it out once it reaches my market, which it does look like it won't reach my market till the end of August. And look, it's probably not going to be any major awards concern or anything like that, but I am genuinely curious enough to check it out. So I don't know. Either I'll get a chance to catch this on a afternoon at my local theater, or I'll wait. It'll pop up out, on digital, and I'll catch it while working from home. Eli Roth also has a new horror film arriving in Ice Cream Man, which, as you might have guessed, is about a killer ice cream vendor. It's being distributed through a very small distributor that typically handles limited releases, and I have to admit the concept looks a little too over the top for me. But look, when I get the chance, I will give it a shot. I'm not aware if Eli Roth, and maybe people are going to make fun of me for this, if he's caught up in some kind of controversy, because I've seen a lot of angry reactions to this movie, and the fact that it doesn't have any major distribution, even though um even though his last movie Thanksgiving, which I thought was a pretty decent horror film for that year, was a success. Thanksgiving was a success at the box office and with critics. Um, but I don't know if there's some kind of controversy that I'm not aware of. I should probably do my research, but I know people are really angry about this him getting a chance to do this movie, which quite frankly the movie doesn't look good to me, but whatever, I'll still give it a try. And finally, Netflix will debut their straight-to-streaming release, The Last House, starring Wagner Moura and coincidentally, late Fame's Greta Lee. As I just mentioned, that movie. The film follows a family trapped in their home by mysterious circumstances. I don't know how much else about this one at the moment. I will be giving it a watch though. It is a straight to streamer on Netflix, so fingers crossed When it comes to that, you don't know what you're gonna get out of that. But yeah, I'll definitely be getting you guys a review of One Night Only by the end of the week, and I will do my best to try to catch up with the other stuff. But this is a lot of indie stuff that's gonna get slowly rolled out through the month, so we'll see when it lands here in my market. And Children of Blood and Bone, didn't just see a trailer drop this past week. But it brought even more drama by having this trailer drop, involving the source materials author, Tomi Adeyemi. Adeyemi, who had already begun posting that she was no longer supporting the movie, she released this very vague video online, which she claimed she was harassed so badly behind the scenes that she nearly suffered what sounds like a nervous breakdown, and described the whole experience as one of the worst, if not the worst experience of her life. And I my reaction to this on X was that the way she's keeping these comments so vague, I don't think it's helping her as much as she think it might be, because it does leave room for rumor and innuendo to take hold, while also allowing the other side to have an opening to craft their own narrative. My read on the situation, honestly, is that she got a harsh lesson in how film adaptations can make significant changes to the story material, and a major blow up with producers ended up happening over, maybe even a major blow up with the director, Gina Prince Bythewood. um, However, she was still publicly praising this production as early as, I should say, as late as a few months ago. You know, I and I will say that there is a lot of concern over the fact that this is coming out in January, which is like the dumping ground, as everybody knows, for movies. A lot of It's very it's not uncommon for us to start the year with some crappy bad horror films or comedies. Though to be fair, we've also gotten some okay action films. We've had some surprising hits like The First Megan or One of Them Days. Like we've had every now and then these pretty decent movies that suddenly drop in January. But it's very, very weird to me. Now, apparently they're shooting for like around MLK weekend. Supposedly, Paramount thinks that they can still potentially turn this into something that becomes almost like a Black Panther, and where it becomes super popular, hits the site, guys, hangs around all year long, and it's a big awards player. I don't know if that's gonna happen, but I will say, looking at that trailer, it does look like the kind of movie that they typically would release as a big summer thing, as a big summer blockbuster, and it does make me wonder if they're not as confident in it as they're projecting, and if the author is really unhappy with the changes that have been made. So it's a very weird situation, and I really hope we get much more details on what the hell is going on. Now, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, which owned and operated the Golden Globes until a series of scandals brought it to the point that it sold control to Penske Media, a company that does own a significant portion of entertainment journalism. We're talking IndieWire, we're talking Variety, we're talking Hollywood Reporter, um, including several outlets that cover awards, has now filed allegations against Penske. The Hollywood Foreign Press Association claims that Penske used its media holdings to slander the organization and help create the conditions that led to the sale. Penske denied such, and it looks like this one is going to the courts to settle, which does make me wonder if the HPFPA has evidence of such an elaborate scheme that they're claiming. And I will tell you this. Let me get my thoughts out here. I'm going to get away from the show notes and what I wrote on the weekly digest here. the Hollywood press, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, and me have not gotten along. There's a lot of people who I think mistakenly think that I miss their control over the Golden Globes because I'm also not a big fan of some of the stuff that's happened under the new Golden Globes membership. But I did not like, and I don't think a lot of people like, that the Hollywood Foreign Press Association was so they arguably, especially because the Golden Globes used to have such power compared to today, they arguably derailed certain major awards campaigns for certain diverse films. And on top of that, which was probably primarily driven by the fact that I think they literally in their like 80 or so membership only had like one black member. On top of that, they played access games that led to ridiculous things like Emily in Paris getting nominated on the show side of things. Now, I don't really care that much about the show side of things of the Golden Globes. So, okay, let's talk about the movie side of things. The HFPA will consistently try to get behind certain movies and performances all because of celebrity. Like, excuse my language, but they were basically referred to as star fuckers. Like, these are the people who basically are at fault for Bohemian Rhapsody getting as close as it did in Best Picture. These are the people who tried to derail um Everything Everywhere All at Once. These were the people who, you know, try to go with Avatar over Hurt Locker, which I will say in that case, I personally like Avatar more than Hurt Locker. But my point is that they did have their issues, and they would hold press conferences that were only attended by their members, where they were infamous for asking stupid, awkward, and sometimes downright sexist and racist questions. And unfortunately, a lot of stars would go there, or directors, because you're trying to get a Golden Globe nomination or win a Golden Globe. And Ann Thompson uh, was much more eloquent than me in talking about this uh, with the HFPA in their past. So you should check out the latest Screen Talk podcast that she's co-host. And my issue is that the HFPA was caught in scandal. They became so unpopular and so poisonous and so toxic that they ended up making this deal with Penske Media, and Penske Media bought them. And what Penske Media did was that they decided, we're going to take away all your voting power, but we're going to continue to we're going to pay you as members. And on top of that, we're going to um invite all of these international critics, and if not critics, film journalists, to come in and be part of the group. And had this dramatic swing where now the Golden Globes are much more higher brow. You're gonna, if you want to see what the higher brow voters in the Academy are probably gonna go towards, or in definitely the international voters, you want to keep an eye on the Golden Globes. And I do think that there has been too hard a swing where you see them going with Amelia Perez over Wicked. You see them going with Hamnet over Sinners. And no disrespect to Hamnet, okay? I'm not, I don't have a problem disrespecting Amelia Perez, but no disrespect to Hamnet. But it was weird that Sinners could only win their little box office award while Hamnet won drama. And not to mention that the Golden Globes, by the way, didn't give Honora a single award. and or Coda, and that went on to win Best Picture. So the Golden Globes, I do think there's been too dramatic a shift to correcting things, but that doesn't mean that I want the HFPA back. The HFPA are alluding that Penske Media basically ginned up all this controversy so that things could get so bad that they could come in and say, "Hey, we'll help you out and we'll buy the gloves." And there is stuff out there that apparently certain contractual obligations have run out, so the HFPA isn't getting paid as much by Penske Media and their members and all that stuff. They're losing voting power. I know that the president of HFPA has had all these issues where she had issues with the jokes that were being made when Gerard Carmichael hosted a couple years ago. Even though, to be fair, I don't think he was a good fit for that show, and all this other stuff. Here's the thing, though. If they are these allegations that they're doing, they better have some actual evidence because this is a pretty elaborate scheme that you're talking about. But and here's the thing: Penske Media has been caught getting accused of trying to push their finger on the button of certain things because they do own a lot of entertainment journalism that involves with awards coverage, that involves some really big names trying to predict awards. They own Hollywood Reporter, they own Variety, they own IndieWire. Those are some big names. I believe they even own Gold Derby now. So that's a lot of power that they can have. I don't know if they have as much power as people think they do. Do I think they try to push for certain movies and stuff like that? Maybe. And there is the whole situation that they've arguably have ginned up some controversies regarding the Astros, and a lot of their members are Critics' Choice. I mean, a lot of their journalists are Critics' Choice members, and did that help some friction there between CCA and HCA? So some people say that Penske isn't necessarily innocent or saintly here themselves. My thing is that take that to the side. What are the chances that Penske Media decided we're going to do this all out attack on the HFPA so that things get so bad that we could swoop in and take control of the Golden Globes? That's a pretty elaborate scheme, and you would have to have the scheme work because it could easily have become that they beat up on them and someone else bought the Golden Globes. So if they have evidence of this, which would be a bombshell, they should come forward with it. But to me at the moment, and maybe things will change, this sounds to me like a lot of sellers' remorse from these folks. And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. You guys really destroyed your reputations. You refused to make fixes until it was too little too late. And you gave away everything to Penske. Now, again, if they have evidence that Penske Media and had this elaborate thing to buy this thing up, by all means come forward with that evidence. And it's going to be fascinating to see if this lawsuit gets anywhere down the line. But I'm going to be keeping my eye on this. This sounds a little way too conspiratorial from the HFPA. But again, there's a part of me that also thinks, well, they got to have some evidence, because how are they going to prove this in court without evidence? I don't know. I'm going to keep my eye on that. But what else do you know? What else? The sky is blue. Death, taxes, and the Golden Globes have some scandal, some disturbing, though I would say unfortunately not really surprising or shocking allegations of sexual abuse are emerging about Jared Leto through an upcoming BBC documentary that's apparently set. I don't know if it's set to air or has aired, but it is alleged that the Oscar-winning actor um, basically was involved in a lot of sexual abuse, targeting of minors. Apparently, this in this documentary, 4 specific women speak up, even though there's been other women that have talked about this in the past. The Oscar-winning actor has long been surrounded by rumors of and speculation alleging predatory behavior, including stories about him contacting young models um, on social media DMs and old social media posts from figures such as James Gunn, suggesting people in the industry were aware of concerns involving underage girls. And I will tell you this because there is a tweet out there that's circulating of James Gunn cracking jokes about like it was something like there was a tweet where someone was making a comment about like, "Hey, Jared Leto, how many like young models do you keep like trying to slide into their DMs?" And I think they have mentioned something about 20 to 25 years, and James Gunn literally responds, um, "Wait, I thought he didn't stop at 18. He goes younger or something like that." And that was a tweet from like 2018. And apparently, if you go to IMDb message boards, there are stories after stories because there are a lot of like industry connected people that hang out in those IMDb message boards. There are apparently so many stories about Jared Leto being creepy, always obsessively hitting a bunch of young women's DMs, targeting minors and not caring about it. Um, Behavior when he was touring in his band. Um, it is some really, really disturbing, uncomfortable, unnerving stuff that is out there about Leto. And I gotta tell you, the whole innocent till proven guilty and stuff like that. But I will tell you, there are a lot of red flags here. There's a lot of there's there's a lot of like smoke where there is fire type of situation going on here, and it is not looking good for Leto. I would not be surprised if, I mean, with this BBC documentary, some of the things, and I gotta believe there's probably some more things coming. If I were Jared Leto, and he's apparently coming out and saying these allegations are completely untrue, but if I were him, and though if I were him, I would hope that none of this shit will be coming up because I would not be engaging in this behavior. But Jared Leto, he's probably gonna need a lawyer. He's probably gonna need a lawyer. This is looking really, really bad for him, and I just hope that if this is true, and quite frankly, it is looking more likely to be true than not. I hope these young women, I hope these lawyers have gotten these young women ready for the media frenzy that could potentially come from all this. Director Mike Leigh announced that he considers his upcoming film, which will be premiering at the upcoming fall festivals, likely to be his last, as he does not appear optimistic about his recent health issues. And if that proves true, it will mark the end of a remarkable career that's given us numerous films that found devoted audiences over the years. And I am now especially fascinated to see how what is looking like his final film is going to be received. Mike Leigh. I'm not gonna pretend to be some massive, massive Mike Leigh fans. His movies don't like end up in my like best of the year list. I do like them quite a bit. I liked Hard Truths quite a bit, and I think a lot of people would be angry about the fact that I didn't quite find a spot for Mary John Baptiste, who does give a great performance, but she just barely didn't make it onto my ballot, which is a hot take considering some critics really tried to push her that year. Um, but I really like his movies. I do need to check out Secrets and Lies though, which a lot of people do think is his best movie, and I think it's the only movie that got nominated for Best Picture that he did. But um I do really like his movies, even though again they're not among my favorites of their year most of the time, at least of the ones that I've seen. Um, but even with that, it is going to be unfortunate to not have him in the conversation anymore. That it sounds like he's starting to have some realizations about his twilight years and how much time he thinks he has left. So, I, it, his work is going to live on through um through all the movies that he's given us, and I am very very fascinated to see what this last movie how it's going to play. And finally, we started on a bit of a dour note. Let's end, I guess, on a bit of a dour note. Another week, another upsetting loss for the industry. This past week, Glen Hansard, best known for film fans for his work in Once, the 2007 John Carney film that became a major critical and cinephile favorite while winning the Oscar for Best Original Song, passed away at the age of 56 following a tragic motorcycle accident. That's now 2 straight weeks that I've had a report on someone in the industry dying young because of a vehicle collision. Hansard's primary focus throughout his life was music, and one video that's already making the rounds again is his performance of Fairy Tale of New York at Shane McGowan's funeral from I think back in 2023. The eerie part is that McGowan's duet partner in that song, Kirsty McCall, also died young in a tragic boating accident. Which, by the way, there's all this controversies about a cover up and who was actually behind the wheel of the boat when she died untimely, which is a whole can of worms that I'm not going to get to in here. So that's kind of freaky. That here you have Glenn Hansard playing this song at the funeral of the guy who made it this infamous, Irish song, and McGowan's passed away. McCall's passed away. She passed away way back in 2000. And by the way, she actually was making some pretty good music when she passed away. Um, she has a song called "In These Shoes" that I've listened to a lot of times. It's actually a pretty catchy song. And now Hansard, who was singing the song, has passed away. Um, you know, it's interesting because once was I remember 2007. I was 18 years old in 2007, and that was a really good year for film for the most part from what I remember, though I do need to revisit it as a whole. And I remember once was this really big hit with critics. It was this big critical darting. Cinephiles and highbrow people with highbrow taste go crazy over the movie. I still meet people who it's not um No Country for Old Men. It's not There Will Be Blood. It's not even like a Super Bad or Juno. That's their favorite film of 2007. Their favorite film of 2007 is Once. And of course, the song Falling Slowly, which Hansard won the Oscar for. And I, to this day, and though it makes me feel old that it's coming up on 20 years since I watched that Oscar ceremony, I still remember watching him win that Oscar with his songwriter partner. And I my hot take is because there's a lot of people out there that really, really like that movie feel and that song means a lot to them. I personally would have given the Oscar to one of the Enchanted songs. Sorry, but you know, there are people who adore that movie and adore that song, and I am due for a rewatch of that movie. I mean, I just recently watched the new John Carney, and typically I like John Carney's movies, um, but this is Once is typically seen as easily by a lot of people as their favorite film of his. Maybe you'll have some people who say Sing Street, but Once is the popular pick. And I'm not gonna like someone like me who was not as touched by that movie and that song. Even I know the impact of this loss, and that is now 2 straight weeks that a vehicle collision has taken someone away from us in such an untimely manner from the industry. I am telling you, folks, respect the road, respect driving out there with things that can kill, drive safely. But this is unfortunate. I keep hoping that I get to a week where I won't have to report on the industry passing, but it happens. It's life. People die every day, and people in the industry pass away all the time. And unfortunately, this untimely tragic passing happened. And look, his legacy through his music is going to live on. Once it's going to be a very special film. It's easily one of the most impactful canon films of 2007. Some would argue of 2000s period. Um, but may he rest in eternal light, and his legacy will live on. But unfortunately, sad passing. And again, I everybody out there, whether you're in a car, a van, a bus, a motorcycle, try to drive safely out there. This is 2 weeks straight now that we've lost someone to a vehicle collision. Okay, and I think that's enough there for the that 15th episode of the Mendez Movie Report podcast. All right. So next week, I will be back next week to talk about One Night Only, that's going to be interesting to see how bizarre that is. I'm seeing a lot of mixed reactions to that from people who have seen it. But I will be back next week to talk about that. Look, like obviously react to whatever major film industry news has happened. But until then, you can find my work at mendezmoviereport.com. Find me on all social media under Mendez Movie RPT. And if you want to email me at authorlmendez@gmail.com. Until then, God bless. And do me a big favor. Go watch a great movie for me.